Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We are going to start the webinar now. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Sally Torbert, and I am the Global Lead for Policy and Research at the International Budget Partnership, or IBP. IBP partners with budget analysts, community organizers, and advocates working across the world to advance public budget systems that work for all people. So together we generate data, advocate for reform, and build the skills and knowledge of people so that everyone can have a voice in public resource decisions that impact their lives. So today we're very excited to have you join us as we are launching a new procurement risk assessment guide. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that this webinar is being conducted with interpretation in English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and Bahasa Indonesian. So if you can click on your screen, the interpretation button you see here, you can listen to this webinar in your preferred language. The session is also being recorded and will be made available after the event, as well as the slides from today's presentation. Throughout this webinar, we encourage you to use the question and answer function to submit questions, and we will use your questions to direct them to our panelists today about the tool. So this webinar today is talking about procurement risks. So we'll start with what is a procurement risk and why does this matter for service delivery? Across countries, procurement is where a large share of public funds are actually turned into goods, services, and infrastructure. And when it works well, children get textbooks on time, clinics have medicines, and roads are built safely. When it goes wrong, money is wasted, projects are abandoned, and communities are left without the services they rely on. Increasingly, civil society, community groups, and journalists are being asked to monitor procurement, but they often face two challenges. First is that procurement systems are complex and technical, and second is that the information needed to spot problems is often scattered or incomplete. And so it's really hard to understand where the procurement risks are until it's too late and services go undelivered. So today we're launching a tool that we hope can close that gap. And this is the Procurement Risk Assessment Guide, which has two components. A PDF guide, which is a practical manual that walks through 9 phases of the procurement process, showing exactly what to look for, which documents to request, and how to spot where things go wrong. As well as a ProcureBot, which is an interactive AI chatbot that helps you trace real-world service delivery problems back to which procurement phase you should look at to see where things went wrong. I'm excited that we have speakers today from South Africa, Indonesia, and Nigeria who have used these tools in this work and also have been key authors in developing this tool. So first, I'd like to introduce our first 2 speakers for our webinar today. We're first going to turn to Carleen van der Westhuizen, who is IBP's South Africa's research manager and one of the co-authors of this guide. And she's going to speak to us about why procurement risks matter for understanding service delivery. And she'll be followed by Claudine Malkovich, who's IBP South Africa's research coordinator and also the co-author of this tool, who will also be sharing the specific guide. But first, Carleen, over to you. Tell us, why does procurement matter for service delivery?
Thanks, Claudie, and welcome everybody. Sorry, thanks, Sally, not Claudie. I'm looking at Claudie. As Sally indicated, I'm the head of research at IBP South Africa. At IBP South Africa, for the last, more than a decade, we've been working with civil society organizations and residents living in informal settlements to improve these residents' access to basic services such as water, sanitation, and refuse removal. And I'm not sure if everybody is aware, but informal settlements in South Africa refers to settlements where people live in informal dwellings. So it can be made of whatever material they actually have access to, but it's not brick and mortar houses. And in these informal settlements, the residents usually rely on outsourced service providers appointed through the public procurement process to provide them with access to water, sanitation, and refuse removal. And in South Africa, it's actually more than 10 million residents, so 10 million people that live, that depend on outsourced services. And over the years, through the work that we've been doing with these residents, with civil society organizations, and also through our own research, we found that many of the challenges associated with the delivery of the services are actually a result of risks that occur during the public procurement process. And over the last, I think about 2 years, we've been fortunate enough to work with our country offices in Indonesia, Senegal, and Nigeria as part of a project with Sally. And we've also very quickly realized that one of the key challenges that we have in common across all these countries that impact on service delivery actually relates to procurement, and not only as in our case, the delivery of services on the ground, but also related to infrastructure, building of clinics, of hospitals. So we were very excited when we got the opportunity from the Gates Foundation when they indicated that they would like us to put a guide together to identify what are the main risks that they and their country officers should look out for during the public procurement process and what can be done to mitigate these risks. And of course, we spoke about them and said we really actually want this to be useful for the communities and the residents that we work with. And this is how this guide was born. So in the first instance, it is to assist community organizations across the developing world and residents living in marginalized communities to understand what are the risks in the procurement process that impacts negatively on the delivery of their services, and also what can possibly be done to mitigate either against the impact of the risk after it has happened, but also what can be done to make sure that those risks don't occur in the first place. And I think the one thing that is slightly different from this guide is there's such a focus on starting with service delivery issues and then linking it to procurement challenges. But this guide is then also secondly aimed at helping people from the donor community to understand what to look out for when donor funding is being used in countries through the public procurement process to fund projects, and then actually by anybody that's interested in the procurement process and would like to understand a little bit better. So as Sally indicated, my colleague Claudia Mailovich will tell you more about the guide itself and how it works and the structure of the guide. Claudia.
Thank you, Colleen, Sally. I just want to check this. Can everybody see my slide? Okay, excellent.
Yes, it can, Claudia. Thank
So,
you.
as Colleen said, we had developed the guide that we are launching today is titled quite a nameful, but effectively it's a guide to common risks and how to address them. And just to give you some background, so when we started looking at this guide, as Colleen gave you the background now, a lot of years and work has gone into trying to understand procurement from a service delivery perspective. And as part of that work, generally, like you, of course, look at background information and what is in the existing literature, given the fact that procurement is something that is widely written about. So to start us off, when we started doing the work on the guide itself, we did quite an extensive background research of the existing literature in the field. So effectively looking at everything from the OECD guides to from the OCP, from the Open Contracting Partnership, Transparency International, and really did like a really wide search of the existing literature to see what is available and what is usable for communities and then of course for donor organizations. The reason for this was that given the fact that this field is so widely written about, it's something that we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel here. So if this is something that has been covered, we wanted to see how it is done and also then what do we need for it to work for what we want the guide to achieve. So the findings initially that we got from the existing background literature was that the guides already in circulation focused mainly on procurement practitioners and then, in many cases, government officials as the users. Apologies. Then the second thing is that in a lot of the cases, the guides were quite technical and dense. So if you didn't have existing procurement information or existing knowledge about procurement, it would be quite a mouthful to try and piece together all the different parts. Another issue that well, not an issue, but one thing that we picked up, which we wanted to address in this guide, was there wasn't one consolidated overview where you had all the phases of public procurement and all the risks which directly can impact service delivery in one guide. And then another issue that we wanted to address was to consider what mitigation strategies are in place, which donors and civil society and communities would be able to use to try and almost mitigate the risks of these procurement issues. And the issue that we picked up was that the mitigation strategies mainly focused on a government perspective and something that would require government intervention. So what we then did is, when we developed the guide, we drew on the existing literature as well as drew on the country experiences which Colleen has highlighted, both from South Africa, from Indonesia, from Senegal, and from Nigeria. And the reason for this was that through the years, we've done a lot of research, and that research gave us very strong lived experiences in terms of what can happen on the ground and what residents pick up as most problematic, as well as some of the existing mitigation strategies that they have identified themselves. So the audience, as Colleen said, the guide was developed to address CSOs, then communities, donors, and then, very importantly, anybody else that's interested in procurement risks. And in how it impacts service delivery and how to address these service delivery risks. So the guide, after it went through its first iteration, was then tested and workshopped in Indonesia, Senegal, Nigeria, and South Africa. Our colleagues from Nigeria and Indonesia and Senegal will give you a little bit more feedback in terms of how they have experienced the guide and that testing process. And then the final guide was then amended based on the feedback from the country offices. Critically important, this guide, we wanted somebody without procurement experience or very limited procurement experience to be able to use the guide and really engage with it. So in terms of the structure, we structured the guide according to the 9 phases of public procurement. The 9 phases that we decided on to use was basically, and the phases start from needs assessment all the way to contract management. And we decided to go with the phases as described in the OECD toolkit for procurement transparency, effectively. And the reason why we did this is because we wanted something that globally, that a standard is set and that everybody can use. When you look at the guide itself, you will see there's space for a user to write down what the phases are called in their country. Even though the phases might be called something different, the structure of it still remains the same, and that which happens under each phase is pretty consistent. So what we then did for each phase is we provided a brief summary of the phase, we provided a list of documents which are available and created during the phase, as well as what can happen to service delivery if something goes wrong in this phase specifically. So we then identified the most common risks in the phase. We provided guidance on how to determine if a specific risk has occurred, as well as suggested actions which can reduce the impacts of risks on service delivery. And then critically, we do propose some measures which we think could help mitigate that the risks take place in the first place. So just to show you, this is a very blown up version of what the design looks like in the guide specifically. You'll see here, as I highlighted, the description of the guide gives a very simplified high-level overview of what the phase is, then the impacts of the risks. The documents to look out for was something that was very important for us from a user perspective, because in many cases, the information that you derive from public procurement, you will find in the documents, but it is not something that you necessarily know where to go with. And then critically, the steps here which we derived effectively from how we work backwards to try and figure out if a risk occurred. This comes then from our experience. And then, of course, what the donors can do and what civil society can do in terms of their own advocacy and strategies. Then, critically important, one of the big procurement risks that we identified is procurement transparency. And this is a risk that takes place across all phases. So we did highlight procurement transparency in the guide as a separate section. Because a lack of publicly available information is a challenge, as we know, at all phases of public procurement. This is a critical issue because without access to the procurement information, it can be really hard or impossible if you try and figure out what steps to take to address these risks. So the first point of call would always be to try and get the information. And if that does not exist, you have a problem. What we effectively do in this section is so that we provide guidance on finding the procurement information, as well as what donors can include in their funding agreements when there are specific donor-funded projects, as well as changes that CSOs can advocate for to ensure that there's best practice in terms of procurement transparency. It's very important to highlight, though, that this guide is not focused on procurement transparency. Our literature review showed us that there is really strong procurement transparency guides, and we actually send users to 2 procurement transparency guides, which have been developed by the Open Contracting Partnership. So just to highlight again, this is a tool that we developed that is really fit for purpose and something that we believe should be easily usable. And then just in terms of the use itself, the tool itself can effectively be used both almost backwards, so starting from the service delivery problem to find out what went wrong and in which phase of the procurement process it went wrong, or it can then be used before contract monitoring starts or before an agreement is signed. Yes, so that is everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cloudy. And I'll just remind our participants today, please feel free to add in your comments and questions into the question and answer Q&A button. And because we'll be directing questions to Carleen, Cloudy, and our other speakers right after this upcoming section. So now we would love to share with you some practical experiences of how would you use this guide. And we are very excited to welcome 2 speakers who are going to be sharing with us ways that they applied the tool and what they used from actually applying the tool to look at very specific procurement processes in Nigeria and in Indonesia. So our 2 speakers today are Mr. Ramli Ernada from Fitra in Indonesia, and Mr. Jide Bangboise from Nigeria, the Senior Program Officer at the Justice and Development Peace Commission, or JDPC, in Oyo State. So we're going to start with Ramli. So Ramli has worked for many years with IBP, and in particular, he's based in Lombok, Indonesia. And Ramli was one of the pilot testers who worked in testing out how would you apply this tool in understanding procurement risks, specifically on water and sanitation spending in Indonesia. So, Ramli, over to you. How did you apply this tool, and what did you learn in the process?
Baik, terima kasih. Sally.
Okay, thank you so much, Sally.
Selamat siang semua.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I will share how this piloting is done in Indonesia. So in Indonesia context, we do this piloting in the wash sector, water, sanitation, and hygiene sector, including in solid waste sector. And why is this becoming a key issue in our area? Because in Indonesia, access to wash are still low. On average, only 75% for each sector. And in the coastal area, the gap is even severe, below 70% accessibility. That is why we believe infrastructure improvement through infrastructure procurement and its supporting facilities to fulfill wash sector becoming very important. And what become critical is during the goods and services procurement stage that is conducted by the government, especially in the coastal area. Now, in the last piloting process, especially when determining the procurement project sample that we will assess, we try to identify several criteria. First, based on the information that provided by the government, we try to group several projects that related to wash issue that become our interest. We work with the local coalitions. So we try to group the sectors, and from that so many procurement package, we try to group it. Second of all, after group it, we try to consider the location. So out of that so many procurement projects that the government is implemented, the government is implementing, we try to sort it out based on the location, the project location. And then we select the project that is located in the coastal area in Lombok Island. And then we identify several projects, and then we use the next criteria, the third criteria, that is based on the procurement methodology. So procurement methodology in Indonesia is quite complex. It undergoes several methods. So we choose the procurement method through tender and through non-competitive or called direct appointment. So direct appointment procurement is actually quite risky because it can be intervened by politicians. So it is called the priority project, the local parliament priority project. And the next criteria, we also try to identify based on the value. We try to choose project that has high value and many beneficiaries. And the beneficiaries actually the women who live in the coastal area. And we also would like to ensure that the monitoring process running smooth, and we try to engage representative from people with disabilities. So we try to sample the project that is located in accessible area. So there are many elements involved in this project that comes from different background. We engage the local community. They play a lot. They help us a lot in validating the condition on the ground and help us to update the information throughout the monitoring stage. And we try to engage the local media as well, so they help us a lot, help us to help how to collect the data from the field based on the experience that they have. They also share information about the political landscape. So they share data and information about the risk assessment throughout the monitoring or throughout the assessment process. We also engage several local CSOs, both CSOs that focus with vulnerable groups and CSOs that focus on fulfilling wash services. We also engage the service provider or the vendor that not contracted by the government. Therefore, they are free from conflict of interest, so they can share with us in honest way. They share with us the fraud practices that impacting the quality of the goods and the service delivery, and explain to us why the low quality of the products and services that being procured. And then what is the most important findings that we got? There are two things. The first one is about the transparency in the procurement process is quite limited, especially the one that happened in the Lombok area. So even though information are shared through official website, but the information only general information about the general procurement plan and that are accessible to the public. However, the contract document, other specific documents are very limited. While those documents can really help in the monitoring and assessing process. Second finding, most of the method that the government use, the method that mostly used is the non-competitive method, the direct appointment method, which quite risky that fraud may happen and making wash procurement processes becoming slow and delayed. So after reading the documents, we conduct field visit and we found out many shortcomings happening in the procurement processes. We found leaking pipelines and substandard quality. So the assessment provide a good impact. So by the time the monitoring, the assessment is completed, the service provider then completed the rest of the project, even though they report that their contract has been completed, but because of our assessment, they then really completed the project. And in addition to that, other lessons learned. So the lessons learned we got, first, it is very important to build networking with all relevant stakeholders that has different backgrounds. And second, during the implementation, we need to make sure we got the document that we need through formal or informal processes. And the third lesson learned, it is very important to have people who have technical understanding on how procurement is implemented. And to close the story in Indonesia, the goods and service procurement monitoring is very effective based on our experience in utilizing the toolkit, and the benefit is felt by the community who live in the coastal area. I think that will be all that I can share to you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, and over to you, Sally.
Thank you so much, Ramli. Very much appreciate you sharing these experiences from trying out the toolkit in Indonesia. And I think there's a number of points that you raised that echo what Cloudy shared earlier, and that to do this assessment, one of the most important starting points is understanding where services aren't working. And so you talking about pipelines that are leaking, that the quality of some of the wash services, they really weren't great. And your work engaging with the CSOs and the communities to understand where the problems were, and then identifying where those procurement contracts that should have been delivering those services is exactly what the process of the tool would be. And the findings that you came up with, very, very interesting here around the challenges of using non-competitive procurement methods and the risks that creates for making sure that government deliver quality services with this funding. And also, I mean, what a great example of actually a contractor being pressured to finish a contract, right? This is just from monitoring, not even any additional advocacy, just paying attention. So really great. Thank you so much, Rami. I think some really great experiences from Indonesia, and we really appreciate you joining today. Our next speaker is from Nigeria. And so Mr. Jide works in Oyo State, and he works in a different sector. So he's been part of IBP's effort to pilot the procurement risk assessment in Nigeria, in looking specifically at health spending. So different sector, but procurement often is many of the same challenges. So Jide, would love to hear from you. What has your experience been trying to use the findings from this tool to understand procurement risks in Nigeria? Over to you.
The presentation will be on the 4 levels. 1, why do we need the procurement toolkits as CSOs? 2, how do we apply, in practical sense, how do we use it in our work in Nigeria? 3, what is the main findings of the experimentation? Why lastly, how do we, or how CSO take forward the lessons of what we realized from the experimentations of the toolkits on ground? Let me start from the introduction. You see, originally, those of us who are working under PFM, we do more in the areas of theory than practical. And that toolkit actually exposes us to also understand from the practical perspective the implications of procurement on service delivery, particularly at the facility level, which is the hospitals and the health centers. Because most of the service failure we witness there will be traced directly to the issue concerning procurement. For instance, if you have inadequate equipment or delay in medicine or drug reaching facility, if you take a step to go further, you could realize that this could directly link to either delay in the release of funds or in the contract awards, which is directly linked to procurement. So most of the interventions or the service delivery decay we witness at the facility could be practically linked directly to procurement issues. And that is why as CSO, we also need it. And applying it, we also realize that by applying it, we could also know strategically what are the practical steps to take to address, because we will be able to face the problem over there and know the root cause of those problems and who to also approach. Then how do we apply the toolkits? How do we in Oyo State or Nigeria apply the toolkits? 1, the first thing we did is to study the trends from the budgetary allocation to service delivery. That means from the budget passage to the levels of the facilities where the service is expected to happen. We were able to, we use it at that level because we divided our intervention in about 4 stages. Service delivery, budgets, procurement, or even to the levels of audit. So we divided that. Then we also use that understanding we get from the beginning to the end to also engage the duty bearers and the community people and also the service providers, which are the officials at the OIC, to really know where the problem is. What is the implications of this service delivery failure on the life of the ordinary people? Then the toolkit will also able to break down some of the challenges that manifest out of that. And these are the major findings we notice while applying the toolkit. 1, we notice that there is problem with information. Access to information is a major issue concerning procurement. We realize that most of the information were grossly missing and incomplete. And when you have a situations like that, what we notice is that there will also be a service because you cannot track what you don't have the information about. To really work on procurement became extremely difficult because access to that relevant information, also even who get the contract, how did the contract awarded, well, how much was the contract, is becoming extremely difficult because some of these informations were not accessible. or are not available, or even are missing out. There are some that are available, but the bulk of it is also missing out in the procurement process. Also, we notice that there is a poor coordination between the procurement agency and the MDAs. And this responsible for the delay in terms of contract award, responsible for the delay in terms of service delivery, which indirectly affect the service to the people. So we notice that there is a poor coordination, particularly between the Ministry of Economic Plan, Budget and Economic Planning and the Bureau of
We may have a, yes, I'm afraid we do. Jide, you dropped out for a second. Please come back in. We lost you.
I'm rounding up. So we notice that there is a challenge in terms of oversight. The laws recommended that there should be a procurement council that should oversight or oversee the activities of Bureau of Public Procurement. But unfortunately, as I'm talking to you as of today, both at the national and the state level, we don't have a procurement council have not been constituted. That creates a serious gap and allow the Bureau of Procurement and other procurement actors to do anything they like the way they want to do it because there is nobody that oversighting them. So those are three major findings we also noticed. Then how do we intend to carry forward or follow up on this? One, we intend to also use the findings to engage and advocate for some of the reforms. For instance, we intend to advocate for the society to also, for the government to put the procurement council in place so that they can do a proper oversighting of what Bureau of Public Procurement is doing and other things. And also to reconstitute that committee to also include CSO, because there is a gap. Most of those people in the committees are purely government officials. So we also want to advocate they should civil actors in the oversight so that they will also coming from independent or then we also want to develop a brief, a policy brief to engage the lawmakers, because it will also require amending some of the laws. So we intend to develop a policy brief for engagement of the lawmaker and the executive arms so that they can also see from the angle we are coming from. Then lastly, we may also use to amplify some of the challenges, the implications of these challenges on service delivery. We want to amplify it so that we want to galvanize as much voices as possible to be able to exert pressure on government to do the needful in the interest of the people. Thank you. Sally, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jide. We very much welcome, we're very grateful for you coming and sharing the experience from Oyo State with us today. So it seems like this is a common thread, the challenge of accessing information specifically on individual contracts, contract award amounts, how much was received, what the monitoring of those contracts should be. That's the starting point. And without that, even understanding procurement risks is very hard. That finding you had on the poor coordination between the procurement agency and the different ministries and departments that are supposed to be delivering services, that's also a very common risk we see. And as you said, it leads to delays, right? That long contracting timelines that delay service delivery. So that's a very interesting finding as well. Very interesting as well to hear about the plans to really focus on trying to make oversight more systematic. And even reform even the legal processes, as you say, to strengthen the way that procurement is done. So thank you both so much for sharing that experience. We now see that we've got a number of questions in the chat. So I'm going to pass these on to our speakers. One of them is for Cloudy. We've got another around the needs assessments of projects and innovative ways to assess corruption. So I'm going to start one by one and direct them to our various speakers, depending on who probably is the best place. But Carleen, Cloudy, Jide, and Ramli, please, each of you feel free to answer any of these questions that feel like they apply to you. So our first question comes from Mr. Babakar Nidiaye. Thank you very much. And you're coming from Senegal. and says that the work is important, but sometimes the constraints are overly burdensome procedures, and that tender documents sometimes have to be purchased, guarantees even to apply for a contract are required, and the tender documents themselves may be drafted for multinational corporations in mind. So rather than, for example, in Senegal, are there any ways that this tool could potentially help local economic actors also maybe access procurement systems? Is there any thinking that's been going in? So question for you and is there any thought that we've given or any thoughts you have around ways to strengthen economic actors who are applying for contracts, not just civil servants who are doing procurement? Next, we've got Mr. Timothy Kiprono, who's coming in with a very interesting question on needs assessments of projects. Is this a requirement based on law, or is it just a good procurement practice? He's asking because in countries like Kenya, some have public investment management regulations that mandate that projects undergo appraisal. Is that what the needs assessment is referring to? Or is it anchored in such legal frameworks such that there's a needs assessment beyond just the appraisal? And finally, we've got Damilola, who's asking a question: what are the innovative ways to address corruption in the process of procurement? What can be done to protect whistleblowers? So I'm going to start with those questions. We have a few more, but perhaps I think most of those are for you, Claudia or Carleen. And then we'll see if Ramli or Jide have any thoughts on these questions as well. So perhaps over to Claudia first, and then others if you want to come in.
Hi, Sally. Thank you so much. Mr. Babakar, I'll address your question first, and Sally, thank you for the translation. So I think the big thing is right for you as an economic actor. So a lot of the stuff that you have identified here, such as the overly burdensome procurement procedures, tender documents that must be purchased, like the guarantees that are required, tender documents which are drafted with multinational corporations in mind. Like, for instance, the tender documents that must be purchased. That is something where you as an economic actor would be able to learn from the guide or utilize the guide as well in your own work. Because, for instance, we would in the guide direct the CSOs or the donor organizations to require that tender documents must be freely available, published online, and downloadable for free to ensure that there's equitable access to the tender documents specifically and the information you need. And that is something, for instance, which you as an economic actor would be able to utilize. So I would absolutely encourage you, maybe in your circle of like small businesses or companies that you work with, to also utilize the tool and see what you can take from that and what you can, for instance, highlight as an actor, economic actor who does business with the state, what could be utilized, what you could utilize effectively. And then I will hand over to Carleen to speak on Timothy's question.
Thanks. I'm just waiting for I don't know why there it goes. Thanks, Claudia, and thanks, Timothy, for the question. We do have a section in the guide and also on the bot that will be shared later, where we encourage anybody who's using the guide to actually find out more about the laws and the regulations governing public procurement in their specific country contexts. So from the South African point of view, overall, when we talk about needs assessment, that's part of the procurement planning phase. So part of the first phase, whatever it's specifically called in a specific country. But I think also in more sort of supply chain management type language, that is part of demand management planning. And depending on the type of project, it can include also, for example, market research or market analysis to find out exactly what's out there during the planning process before bid specifications are being written. So I think there's, and like I said, we obviously, from where we're sitting in South Africa, we have a better idea of the South African laws and regulations. And in our case, there's often a suggestion that a needs assessment would be good. But what we're specifically referring to in the guide is that such a needs assessment should really take account of the needs of the user. So it can either be the recipients of the service, or if you think about infrastructure, if it's a clinic in a rural area, what are the specific needs that need to be addressed by that building? So I don't think I have a really good yes or no, but I think depending on the country context, I think there's definitely space to advocate for such a requirement to be part of either the legal framework or so either the law or the regulations and the rules that actually implements the law. I also saw that Judy's hand is up, so maybe he would like to add to the Sally, I just jumped.
No, thank you. Perfect, Carlene. Yes, Jide, what do you think?
I think I would like to respond to the issue of corruptions in procurement process and what can be done for this. Like the previous speaker said, the laws are there. I think the basic problem has to do with implementations of those laws. And we also need to create more awareness concerning the implications of failure in procurement on service delivery. Many people are not aware of the implications of this, and that's actually aiding corruptions. Many people only looking at the concept and the conceptualizations of the budget or the estimate and the end product. They don't consider what happened within the procurement framework. I think we need to create a lot of awareness around this area so that we can open up that flanks. Then I also said the laws are also there, like they said, the laws are there. Then there are also some areas in the law that also need amendment, like I proposed. If you look at Act of Nigeria 2010, at 2010 and Oyo State Procurement Law, there are councils there. But if you look at the compositions of the council, they were mostly civil servants. They were mostly career officers who were deeply involved in this corruption. And you want them to oversight what they. I think there is also need to also see how do we inject independent actors or interest people and the service head to also involve in that committee so that you can have a free and balanced ideas of what happened. If not, if you continue to put government officials at the champion in terms of reform, let us have the oversight commission be available to council, yes. But if the composition still remains the same, we are still likely to get the same result. I think they all need to beef up that composition to involve other major actors. It could be CSO, it could be the community actors who are direct beneficiary of that service to be involved in oversighting that work. It will also, to a greater extent, balance the forces and reduce the level of corruption. Like the whistleblower, there are laws, but unfortunately, there is also a lot of abuses. I think we also need to also consistently continue to push for proper implementations of those laws, because I always tell people the problems are not the law, but the implementation. I think there's a need for us to also work on the operator better than the law itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jide. Yes, that question of active procurement councils that are not just civil servants, that also can involve community members and people who are the beneficiary of services, being actively involved in the monitoring of procurement contracts. That's a very powerful suggestion, one I hope others may have seen elsewhere. So we have a few more questions in the chat, one for Ramli and one for Jide again. So there's the question for Ramli, again, we've got from Mr. Babakar, in terms of, is there any experience that you've seen in Indonesia? So Babakar sharing the fact that in West Africa, you sometimes have coastal and maritime sectors facing structural barriers in local firms accessing public tenders. And there's also limited opportunities for local providers to be involved in some of these tenders, which can deepen inequalities. Was that something you saw in Indonesia? Was there any form of process in the procurement system in Indonesia that kind of either excluded local firms or any way that kind of would make contracts more accessible to more bidders from the local community in Indonesia being involved to kind of, help strengthen the competition around procurement contracts, or was that an issue there?
Baik, terima kasih.
All right, thank you.
Jadi kalau di dalam konteks di Indonesia,
In the
memang
Indonesian context,
yang banyak menjadi temuan gitu ya, termasuk dalam
in our observation,
proyek pengadaan
and when we conducted observation in the two project locations, we
pemenang tender.
we alleged that there was
Meskipun banyak
the
yang ikut
intentional
penawaran,
arrangement of who was going to win the tenders. So the winners
dan itu yang
of
banyak terjadi, termasuk
the
juga
tenders were already determined
developer
ahead of
juga
time.
ada assessment
So we
kemarin.
found
Dan siapa mereka?
also
Mereka
these
biasanya
findings in
adalah
the two project locations.
kelompok
And these
tim
winners
sukses atau
are
pengusaha-pengusaha
usually
yang selama
business
proses
people,
pemilu atau
business
pemilihan
actors who
kepala daerah adalah
during the
penyokongnya,
local
pendukung
election
dan mereka akan mendapatkan keuntungan
process were the main
calon
supporters of the
kepala
winning
daerah atau
candidates
calon
who got
kepala
elected to
negara ini
become
terpilih. Dan mereka
local heads, mayors
tentu
or governors.
mendapatkan akses yang
And
sangat mudah untuk mendapatkan
these companies
paket-paket tender.
have
Dan
been
dalam
even
konteks
easier
di
access
Indonesia,
to
ini
tender
banyak sekali
packages to projects
modus yang
funded
sering
by the local
dilakukan,
governments.
misalnya dengan
So this is
membuka
one of the
proyek.
most common
Tadi saya sudah sampaikan di awal,
the
ada
most
beberapa
common
metode
method.
pengadaan di Indonesia.
I
Dan
mentioned
yang
earlier that
kompetitif ini
we
dengan
do
nilai
use a
rata-rata
number
di bawah
of
200
procurement
juta rupiah
methods in Indonesia,
itu
and for projects
digunakan
below 200 million
untuk
rupiah,
proyek-proyek yang bisa melakukan penunjukan langsung terhadap
these projects by
apa
law
namanya
can be
penyedia, dan ini banyak
given to
dilakukan
certain
oleh para
companies
politisi yang duduk sebagai
through
anggota
the use
DPRD
of
atau
a direct appointment
daerah.
or a direct
Dan
appointment
ini
method.
sangat
And
berisiko tadi,
usually
sehingga
these smaller
menyebabkan
value projects are
kemudian
given
nanti
to
mereka
the
akan
family members or
menjual
the
lagi
companies
kepada
affiliated with
pemborong pihak
certain
lain
local
lagi untuk
parliamentarians
dikontrakkan,
or local
padahal
officials.
tidak ada di
While
kontrak bahwa ini boleh dikontrak.
and
Nah,
sometimes
kemudian hal
subcontracts
lain
are
lagi yang
created
ini
just to give
cerita dari
certain
salah satu
parts of the
anggota
projects to
Pokja kemarin di
the
Indonesia,
political
itu mereka
supporters of
ada
the local heads.
pengalaman
And
buruk, misalnya
in our
ketika
experience
mereka
also,
mengajukan banding ketika
when
hasil
there was
evaluasi atau pemohonan
appeal in one of the projects
pemenang ya di tahap
after the
awal,
contract
kalau
already
mengajukan
was
banding
already
itu
awarded.
sama artinya dengan
So this is another step in the
akan
procurement
masuk di
process, right?
dalam ranjang
So
blacklist gitu ya. Jadi
when a
peluang
company
untuk mendapatkan tender itu
files
ditutup
for an appeal,
oleh
then usually these companies appealing will be somehow discriminated in the next or the other
Sehingga
projects
yang
and project
penting tadi
tenders.
sudah
That
disampaikan
can
oleh
happen.
GD juga bahwa
And as GD
penting
mentioned,
bagaimana kita
it is
memperkuat tadi
important for
kelompok
us
masyarakat
to
sipil,
strengthen
kemudian juga
civil society
bisa
organizations.
bersinergi ya, berkolaborasi
And I
dengan
think
para
CSOs should
pengusaha lokal atau penyedia lokal
work
untuk
with
kita sama-sama
local
mendorong
providers
agar
and local
proses
contractors
pengadaan barang
so
jasa di
that
lokal
the
daerah
procurement
ini
of goods and
dilakukan
services
jauh lebih profesional,
can be improved, can be conducted with more integrity and a more transparent way. That would be my response in terms of the Indonesian context.
Kalau di kawasan pesisir ini tadi,
and in terms of the coastal areas, we know that infrastructure situation is poor, mostly in coastal areas, and due to those bad practices in the procurement process.
Thank you so much, Ramli. A lot of challenges, obviously, in that can you actually make the tendering process truly competitive when you've got a lot of those political dynamics influencing who is selected as the contractor. We've got, just for time, because we're going to move on to then our next section, which is to share an innovative way that we've come up with that we'd love to try out with you in terms of how to access the guide. Because the guide is, we hope, a fairly accessible tool. But often each of us are coming looking at a specific issue in procurement, and you may not know exactly where and how to start with the guide. And so this chatbot that we're going to share in a few minutes will share more about that. But before we get there, I'm going to take one last. We have a few questions open. We may oh, I see Claudia is actually already answering. I was going to say we may just answer some of these questions by typing in the chat. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to answer all of the remaining questions in the chat. So thank you very much, Romley. Thank you very much, Jide. Thank you very much, Carleen and Cloudy, all of you for sharing so much about the tools and how it's been used so far. So now in the next 30 minutes that we've got remaining on this webinar, we're now going to turn over to this new chatbot. And this is an AI tool that's built off of the procurement risk assessment guide. And so we have with us Ruben Bajatis. I hope I said that right, Ruben. We're very delighted Ruben can join us. Ruben works with us to help train this tool. AI is one of these emerging technologies that often, we need to build. And so this is something that IBP is trying out, and you'll see Ruben share with you how this tool can be used, the ways that it could be applied to help you access the information in the guide. But we're also going to have a chance to hear from you. Can you play with this tool? Can you see how it could be used? So please, Ruben, over to you. What is the Procure bot and how could people use it?
Thank you so much, Sally and colleagues. A great pleasure to be with you today. I'm in Pretoria in South Africa, a bit north of where Carleen and Claudia are. But very happy to join you today and to share with you this tool, which we have developed over a period of time and tested over a period of time. And happy to test it further with you today and to see how we are able to use this tool. If I could just share my screen. There we go. Okay, so yeah, this is ProcureBot, which is the sort of the AI component of this toolkit, as mentioned by Sally and Colleen. And I'll share with you just well, firstly, just an introduction to the bot via this presentation, and then we'll go straight over to the demonstration of it using the actual tool itself and showing you how it works, and also giving some pointers on how to use it. So in the first place, we'll talk about, why ProcureBot, what's the benefit of it, and what's the use of it. The quick tour of the procurement phases I won't spend any real time on, as Colleen and Claudia covered that in pretty much in detail. But also very importantly for the bot, why localization and context matters. So how to approach the bot and essentially how to get what you want from it. And then to show you what ProcureBot does. And then we'll go live with a demo section after the presentation. So firstly, why the ProcureBot? Well, of course, as Claudia and Colleen mentioned at length, residents, communities often don't know whether a particular service is being provided at all sometimes. Sorry, I jumped there. Whether it's being provided or not, when can we expect such a service? Why has it not been happening for the last 3 weeks and then suddenly it happens again? Who can we contact in the event that there are challenges with the service? Or who can we even find out from if there is such a service available? And many of us, particularly the poor and vulnerable residents and communities, simply wouldn't know where to start. I mean, many of us in this webinar today may have a vague idea or may have a good idea of where to start to find out this kind of information. But many, particularly poor and vulnerable residents and communities, community organizations, CSOs, and so on, may not know where to start if we wanted to find out about a particular service. Whether it's being provided by whom, is it via contract, is it on an ad hoc basis? They simply would not know how to go about that. And so, it was designed really with that in mind. So what if there was a tool that could be our guide and that could guide us and private investors as well, in terms of all things public procurement. And that is where ProcureBot then came in. So a quick tour of the phases. As I mentioned, I'm not really going to spend too much time on this, except to say that, as Colleen mentioned already, every country has its own laws regulations around public procurement processes to make sure that government spends its money effectively. But the basic steps involved in these phases are more or less the same or similar. And so many of the risks, mitigations, etc., also apply then to non-competitive bidding methods, which our colleague from Thailand, Indonesia mentioned earlier. The 9 phases there, they are pretty much in one go. That's straight from the guide itself, pretty much, how it looks in the guide. And mostly our focus here would be on contract implementation. So typically with the bot and the chatbot, the first question that we would generally look at, because all other information would flow from that, is there a contract in place for any given service? So if it's in water, if it's in sanitation, whatever service it may be, it's very important to establish in the first instance if there is a contract in place. And if there is, then all of the other information would flow from that. Claudia spoke a little bit about what happens when there isn't that information. Then that work is outside of the bot. Of course, the bot would be able to give you some guidance, maybe of where to look. But generally, if information is not available, then the bot is going to be fairly limited in what it could do. Why localization and context matters? Yeah, as we said, so procurement rules differ very widely between Indonesia, Nigeria, Senegal, and South Africa. Generic advice also doesn't help. And that's also another thing with the bot. So when using the bot, we have to be, it gives out what you put in effectively. So if we are generic and ask general questions, it will give very vague generic answers. But if you are very specific about, let's say, your location, your ward, your county, your city, and the type of service that you would want to know more about, then it is going to be very direct and give you very specific information. And the more detail and the more specificity you can ask of the bot, the more it will help you. So for example, sanitation is very broad. So if we ask, do I have sanitation services in Jakarta? The likely answer is going to be extremely long. But if you mention the specific location that you're in and you want to know something specific about a certain type of sanitation service, whether it's VIP toilets or tanks and so on, then it can zoom into that information more specifically and provide you with more specific answers. So essentially try to be as specific as possible for the bot to really help you, because that will then allow the bot to zoom into the service and find and fetch effectively information available electronically in your area and at whichever level of government is responsible for that service. So just before we go live, effectively our scenario would be the same in all 4 contexts, the same issue, and to see how the bot then provides differentiated guidance based on the information available in the 4 different contexts. So in Dakar, in perhaps Lagos, in Jakarta, in Johannesburg, how does the bot give us different answers with the same sort of underlying sort of fundamentals, but how does it give us different answers for each of those different contexts? And the scenario that we are going to test out in the next phase that Yanni will help me with just launching as you get ready for that. So in each country, we'll put in the country's name, either at the beginning or at the end, or the city's name. We will test whether there is, the provision of sanitation services for VIP toilets or septic tanks or tanks using vacuum tankers or honeysuckers. This is we chose this one because it's fairly common in all 4 countries. Sanitation and the public health risks associated with it is quite a big issue in all of these places that we could find out. And so this issue makes sense because it's sort of pertinent to all 4 contexts, whether this service exists and whether there is a contract in place for the provision of the service would be a good one to test. And as we mentioned before, the starting point would always be if there is a contract in place for this particular service. So we will check that in the scenario that we put out. So yeah, that's the poll that's out at the moment to you. Tell us which country you would like to test first. Indonesia, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and then we'll switch over to the bot itself, a live demonstration of the bot itself, which I will go to in a moment. And then we'll put in the first scenario and see what it tells us, and then take it from there. I'll just give you a couple of seconds to vote, and then Yanni can tell us the results of that, and then we can go live with the demonstration of the bot. Nigeria wins out. So yeah, let me then share the screen for the bot itself. Okay, so once you enter the link at the top there, International Budget Partnership, Public Procurement, Common Risk, and how to address them, there would be links to the bot itself, right at the, in the page there. You would see at the top here, chat with ProcureBot, how it works, customize your context. And so I've got it open at the moment on chat with ProcureBot, right? And the first message that come up is this: would you, how can ProcureBot help you? And at the bottom here, if I scroll down a little bit, you would see it's pre-filled in this information. I'm a community member in South Africa. So here we are going to start with Nigeria. And we are going to say, let's say for the sake of argument or the sake of specificity, in Lagos, Nigeria, is there a contract for the provision of desludging services of VIP toilets, as they are commonly known, or septic tanks using vacuum tankers or honeysuckers? We can take out the part about, if not, how is the service provided? We want to establish in the first place if there is a contract in place for the service given its need. So let's enter that and then see what tells us. Okay, so you would see now it gives you the response and then the detail for that. So every municipality must publish tenders or awards as a generally accepted norm. Whether that actually happens in every instance in all 4 countries, I cannot say. That would be for you to say, but generally every municipality must publish tenders and awards. And then it is giving you the first reference point to check under tender portals for desludging services. Check Lagos State's tender portals. And then it gives you 2 links to those tender portals. In the first instance, Lagos State Public Procurement Agency and the Lagos State Government Tenders page. And it also then gives you tips for the kind of keywords to use when investigating this particular service. And also recommending that you look at perhaps the Ministry of the Environment, Lagos Water, Wastewater, etc. And then if you need, the more it will then start asking you specific information, more specific information to be able to help you with more detail. But it's first point of reference to help you establish. Remember, the question was, is there a contract for the service? So it then refers you to the 2 most likely sources of whether there is a contract or not, and being able to determine from those pages whether the contract has been awarded or a contract has been awarded for those desludging services in that particular area. So you could narrow this down even more. We said in Lagos, but of course, if you have a particular area, let's say ward or county, you could even put that in. So you could say, in this part of Lagos, is there a contract for this provision of sanitation services or desludging services? And then again, it might become, the information that it gives you would depend on what you ask. In this case, we were fairly broad with the state and then the country. But of course, if you can narrow it down even more to the more specific location you're at, your ward, your precinct, your district, etc., it would then provide more information from what's available publicly within those public institutions there, or whoever is responsible for providing those. So yeah, that is the response for Nigeria. And then in terms of just seeing the sort of currency of it, and I would be quite interested to know also perhaps in the comments from our colleagues in Nigeria, whether that would be, whether those are the logical institutions that where the chatbot is referring you to, whether those would be the logical institutions to start to understand, whether you would in fact discover if there's a contract for that service or not. And then I'll quickly run you through both of all three of the others, and then see, test sort of whether the bot is giving us consistent information. So if we put in the same thing, but we say in Jakarta, for instance, Indonesia, is there a contract for this? And then see what it says. And very important, whilst that is loading the answer, very important to say you can type in, of course, the bot is available in all languages. So you can type in the question itself in your own language, and it will respond in your language. Or you could also type the question in English, and simply ask the bot to translate the answer into your language. So that would also work. So again, now when we go to Jakarta, it says the same thing. So every municipality must publish tenders awards as a general practice. So first, then check these two, and it would give you the two most prominent links: Jakarta Provincial Government site, or the LPSE, DKI Jakarta e-procurement portal. And it's then referring you to these two to check whether the contract would have been awarded, or you could pick up from these pages whether a contract has been awarded for the broader area of Jakarta. Again, it may become more specific, and the more specific you become, it may become more helpful, because there may not be a contract award, for example, that covers the entirety of Jakarta. It may be specific to certain segments within Jakarta itself. So again, the more specific you can be with the location of the information you're looking for, the more useful the bot is likely to be. But since we asked the question about Jakarta, this is the two most likely places it is referring us to indicate whether we can find the contract for sanitation services, or in this case, specifically desludging services. Desludging of toilets within those two places. And then again, it gives you the tips with some keywords in the local sort of language, which may be more helpful. Because of course, if we're only going to type this in using the standard language, but there would be specific terms in each country, I would imagine. There would be specific terms that you could type in, and the bot gives you some keywords or advice on some keywords to put in to help that search. So maybe in the next question, if it is not giving you the answer that you want, you could use some of these keywords to try to get more specific information about whether contracts exist. And then it's also giving you an idea of the agencies that might be responsible for whether there is a contract or not for this service. And then if you ask for very specific information, it doesn't stop there. Your next question could then go to, okay, who can I contact within these agencies? And it would then give you the detail of that. If we do the same so you can see the structure of the answer is pretty much the same as for Lagos. But of course, the links that it provides, etc., is specific to Jakarta. If we then say Dakar, for example, in Senegal. Is there a contract for the service? There we go. So you can see in terms of consistency, it would give you the same kind of structure. Because the bot in the programming phase is instructed to be as specific as possible, but also as brief as possible. Of course, all of us are not going to read. We don't want pages of answers when we ask a specific question to the bot. So it tries to be very brief. It tries to be quite pointed, refer you to the right links, the right contact number, the right person. Is generally what its first point of call would be. And then you could get into more detailed conversation with the bot with follow-up questions. But the first question and the first answer tends to be sort of summarized and try to get straight to the point of the question that you're asking, which in this case was about, is there a contract? And again, it says, first check these particular websites, which are around public procurement, the institutions responsible for public procurement. And then it also, again, with keywords, but also again with the agencies who are likely to be responsible for this. And so in your next question, you may then put in, does ONAS, for example, have a contract for desludging services available? So it's trying to help you as well with the keywords and the agencies who might be responsible to refine your search for the information that you are looking for. I think the last one was South Africa. So let's say in Cape Town, South Africa, is their contract. And again, you would see the structure is the same, but then specific for Cape Town. So City of Cape Town tenders, national e-tenders as well. So in South Africa, municipalities have the tenders portal, which they must publish tenders and awards. But there's also a national e-tenders portal where you may find this information if you can't find it at the municipal level. And then again, the keywords, and again, potential institutions that might be responsible for this, apart from the City of Cape Town. There's also water and sanitation departments at the national level that may be helpful in terms of this. So those were essentially taking the same scenario in all four contexts to show you what the bots would respond with, depending on what you ask it. So again, we try to be brief but specific enough with at least the sort of city that we are in and country. And then the question around the particular service that we are looking for, and then see the kind of response that the bot would give you. As I mentioned, you would even want to become more specific than that with your particular ward, your county, your district. Then it could even provide more detailed information. But the follow-up questions that you could run would then help you. The first answer is never going to be the full answer. It's going to lead you in the right direction, with links to the potential institutions who might have this information and where you can find it. But you could then ask a series of follow-up questions for the bot to do that for you and to do the work for you, essentially. So that's a quick demonstration of the bot itself and what it can do. As I said, it is only helpful to the extent that we are specific with the information that we input into it. So do try to be as specific as possible with your questions to the bot or things that you are thinking about, wondering. Just indicate where it is, because then it fetches information and laws and regulations and so on. It can do a quick analysis of all of those based on your specific location. So yeah, that's a wrap from me. Just a quick, our second poll, which country's response felt most helpful or actionable to you? They were all fairly similar. It would be good to hear from from colleague Sally. In those countries where the short answer they saw on the screen was in fact helpful or would help them to sort of further investigate whether a contract exists for, in this case, as we tested sanitation services. So yeah, let's leave it there. We see the results. Nigeria again, South Africa a bit, Senegal, 1 of 13. So Sally, perhaps we could hear from our colleagues in Senegal. Of course, the bot is being launched. It would be very important as well to say that we are continuously trying to improve it and will continue to try to improve it with your user inputs as well. So I would be a bit interested to hear from the colleagues if it's not a great answer, what is wrong with it and where we could perhaps improve it even further.
Thank you so much, Ruben. And it's a really exciting new way of using technology, as you say, to try and make what is sometimes a difficult, complex system more accessible for those who are just starting out to say, where can I find contract information? Where can I find basic system information about my procurement processes? Yeah. We had a really great question that have come in on the Q&A that I want to see if Ruben can answer, or if anyone else who's on our back end has an answer to as well. So Timothy notes that the data draws on general public sources to answer the questions. And so the question is, how is accuracy concerns addressed or safeguarded, especially when there's sometimes cases where there's constraints on public access to information? Especially Timothy flags that there's a potential that there's problems, right? Especially when public procurement is quite messy. And if the bot isn't yet customized to specific contexts and uses targeted or official information. So the question Timothy has for us is, could this be customized specifically for budget advocacy and social accountability? And I guess that's also the question to you, Ruben. How would they provide feedback if they find errors?
So for the technicalities of that, there's quite a bit of it involved. Let me hand over to Raj, and then I can cover the rest of it. But Raj would be able to advise us on, the bot itself, the tool, and the questions that were asked. Raj?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can, Raj.
Hi there. My name is Raj. I'm part of the communications team at IBP. On the bot page itself, let me see if I can get video going. There we go. On the bot page itself, I think Sally's been sharing the links in the chat, and we'll obviously be passing you over the hyperlinks for all the pages and resources after the event. But you'll notice, even when Ruben was screen sharing, underneath the actual where he was typing, there's a little exclamation point where you can click, and that will open a form. So if you find any corrections or issues to do with the bot, there's a step-by-step form which takes 2 minutes to fill in, which will help us improve the bot. So I guess starting from the beginning is that this bot is definitely in its beta phase. We are testing and we are trying to work with all of you to improve this as a resource that can become more efficient, can become more accurate, and can be customized to users. We do want it to apply to as many country contexts as possible. And so if we are starting to get incorrect information on particular countries, we can start training the bot onto making those corrections, making sure that we're making those edits so we make sure that you get the correct information. But we can't be the experts in every country. So we do have a few asterisks along the page where this is sort of new uncharted territory for us, but we're hoping that we can all learn together and see where this can take us. So any other bits that I missed from the question, Sally?
Thanks so much, Raj. And Ruben, I think you also wanted to come in with a follow-up as well, right? Or was that mostly?
No, but again, just to say, further to Rad's point that yes, I mean it's very much in the initial stages, but we would rely on you colleagues, especially using it as well in the early stages, and testing it as much as possible with us, and especially flagging where there are challenges. This answer is not quite right. This is not the right institution for this, for example. But yes, as pointed out in the question, that one of the issues, of course, is this relies heavily on publicly available information. It's pretty much impossible to help if there is nothing available publicly within any specific context. So let's say in Johannesburg, if the municipality or the province or the national government, whoever is responsible, has decided to put absolutely nothing in the public domain, then it would be impossible for the bot essentially to help. And so it's also going to be that kind of iterative process where we need to kind of input into the bot, continually to improve the sort of data that it is drawing from and try to make that as specific as possible for each country. So yeah, it'd be a long haul, but it's going to be worthwhile for all of us, especially to help CSOs, community members, anyone who can log in and just ask a question, like in my county, is this available? So yeah. Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you so much, Ruben, and thank you all for joining us today. This is actually the end of our webinar. So we are excited to let you know that the tool is now live and on our website, both the Procure bot and the PDF guide that you can download and use right away. And I saw our colleague from the Sierra Leone Budget Advocacy Network saying you're going to start procurement monitoring and you want to use the tools. So that is exactly what we'd love to hear is if you are planning to use it, please reach out. We'd love to stay in touch. And so thank you all very much for joining us, and a huge thank you especially to our speakers today. Carleen and Cloudy are co-authors of the guide, Ramli and Jide joining us to share their experiences with us, and Ruben, very much a huge thank you to you as well for sharing us this exciting new development with the Procure bot. We'll be sharing materials afterwards. They'll be on our website within a day, and we hope that you can use the tool and this becomes a resource for you if you're starting to look into procurement systems, where the risks are, and how they can be strengthened to help strengthen service delivery. Thank you very much for joining, and we hope you found this a useful webinar.